As dads, some days we feel like we have all the answers, and some days we feel like we don't have a clue. If that describes you, you're at the right place. This is the All Pro Dad Podcast. Hey, I'm your host, Ted Lowe, and each week on the All Pro Dad Podcast, we ask just one question. We explore the answer, talk about what we've gotten wrong, and occasionally what we've gotten right, talk about what the experts say, and then at the end of every episode, give you just one simple but powerful pro move of the week. And today, I am joined by two other dads, Mr. Bobby Lewis.
Hey, man.
And Mr. Buck Buchanan.
What's up?
Glad you guys are here.
Glad to be here.
Glad we're here. The question of the week, this one's a little bit different for me. I think it's a little bit different maybe for our audience. But the question is how do I build my son's emotional muscles?
Yeah.
And the reason we frame it this way is when I watch and I see dads getting really angry and husbands getting really angry, and research shows this, that men stereotypically are just allowed to be angry, that's an acceptable emotion. Mm-hmm. And when I see that, that doesn't feel strong to me. That feels weak to me, and it's not solid, and it's not steady for dads. And so this is an episode about how to build our son's emotional muscles because there's so many messages that get communicated to kids. We were talking before the episode, of course, that for me, some of these messages that we're going to talk through, I was told directly, and I think you guys had a different experience with that, right?
Yeah. You mentioned anger. Like, I think that's the acceptable one, right?
Right.
Like people around the world are like, oh yeah, it's okay to show some anger. That's passion, right? Yeah. I don't know that historically men have been given license to be shy, nervous, scared, timid.
Or it's always, if you were those things, it was always viewed as you were a lesser
something's
man.
wrong,
yeah,
right?
Something's wrong.
Yeah.
Well, and we talked about it before the podcast, but I feel like, my dad and even the generation before him, it was like heavy of like, don't show emotion, keep it to yourself. And that was vocally told to them.
Right.
And then I feel like with me growing up, there was almost a shift of, no, you can't say that to your children. And so they didn't, but it was just understood. Because even myself, like I'm still, growing up, going to my grandparents all the time. And so I heard my grandfather, say, buck up, rub some dirt on it,
Right.
Or like, get over it, keep that shut down. So, there was still that residual of like, my dad's not telling me that, but I also know like, I shouldn't,
right.
or weak or something way. Weak in some way if I did show that. And so now I think we're in a state where, our emotions are encouraged in all other realms of society. And I think dads might be slow to the game to say, hey, we should talk about this.
Well, if for generations there was a dam built up to hold back, like don't show, there's a weakness. If there's a spring in this dam, we got a problem, right? Like if that's the visual and the dam is broken and now all the emotions come out, like, are you okay with that? Are you upset with that? How are you you're talking about society. How should society deal with men accepting the fact that emotions are a real thing and that if they're expressed, that's not a negative thing, And
I think the term emotional is not okay because that's associated with you're so emotional. Mm-hmm. And there's so much negativity that comes with that. What we're talking about is emotions and the reality of all areas of life, and every relationships have emotions. And so for your kid to grow up strong, because we don't want them to feel, because we feel like they're going to grow up to be weak if they feel these things, the strength actually comes from knowing what to do with your emotions. Yeah. If your emotions are part of life, and they are, and emotions are part of life for your kids, we've got to talk about what to do with them. And I'm passionate about this because I work in the marriage space, and it has hit me over probably the last year. I've always thought I was really good with feelings because I work in this space and I know about it and I know how it makes Nancy feel. And then it hit me like a ton of bricks one day. It was like, all this stuff because you want to know who the enemy is. You don't want to feel anything, so you learn about everything. I've written 2 marriage books, and the first one, I just word searched the word feeling in. Do you know how many times it was in there? Zero. So how do you write a marriage book and doesn't have the word feeling in it? The second book had it in there 9 times out of 46,000 words. And I thought, oh man. And so it's been one of those things in my face to go, oh man, you know a lot about them, but you think your feelings and you don't feel your feelings. So I started rewinding going, what is that about? And I'm very free and I'm very open about this. I mentioned a lot that my mom passed away when I was 10 because it was so formative. Like when I think about childhood, that's the core memory. And despite that's the thing that I remember, that everything shifted that day. Mm-hmm. Everything changed that day. Mm-hmm. And so after she passed away, it was like we just didn't talk about her anymore. Like it was like she is never there. And I had someone say to me, I was crying a couple of weeks later about some mess that I had made or something. And this person said to me, just because your mom died doesn't mean you can cry about every little thing. And then I was talking on the phone to one of my mom's friends, and someone said to me, oh, is someone talking about their problems? So all of a sudden it was like, it is not okay to do this. And I heard all the other messages that other boys were hearing, but it was just like concrete at that point to go, this is not okay. It was super painful. And so I don't think a lot of people came around or knew how to come around or to come around and say, how are you doing? Like, how are you doing with this? And just somebody saying, if this hurts a whole lot, it should. Of course it does. Yeah. And I look back now and I go, I needed someone to say, if this hurts, of course it does. Instead, the messages were, you can't do this. And the other thing was, I think I've wrapped my arms around the fact of going, this hurts so bad that this could kill you. So I had both those messages. It's not okay to express, and it's so painful because you don't know what to do with it. And so I've pushed and pushed, and I think, when I tell people that I don't like feelings after doing what I do, people are like, because I can talk about them and I can help you think about them. Yeah. But feelings is a whole different thing. And so here's some messages, dads, that I think is very important for us not to say, but also to communicate in more subtle ways. Because like Buck and Bobby were saying, maybe those aren't the outright messages that are said, but in small ways, it's understood. The first one is be a man. Abby Watts, one of the iMom authors, wrote in reference to the phrase be a man. She says, think about it. When someone says those words to a boy, be a man and stop crying. Be a man and go punch that kid who took your bike. You're a virgin, be a man and do it. Beneath the surface, be a man tells boys to disconnect from their emotions, objectify women, and resolve conflicts through violence. And I went, drop the mic on that, Abby. And it's so true. And she said, instead, what if we said few people are saying be a man to encourage boys to be men of honor and humble strength. So when we talk about emotions, I know there's some guys listening right now and they're thinking, I don't want my kid to be weak. I don't want him to be quote unquote emotional. I want him to be strong, and nothing could be further from the truth of what we're trying to say here. So be a man. Another thing we hear is stop crying or boys don't cry. I mean, that was the message. It was shaming me, like, talking about your problems, but that's not okay.
Well, and I think even for me, I've said this before, as a dad, like stop crying or don't cry, or there's no reason to cry right now, when apparently there is, to him, to my son, and I think a lot of times it's because of how, and again, this is not a shot at my dad. My dad, I have a great dad. And I think it just is more of the case of how society worked, that we would suppress emotions. And so I get uncomfortable with it sometimes, when my kid is crying over something that I think is trivial, or crying over something that, shouldn't have hurt that bad or whatever like that, I want it to stop because I don't like looking at it,
Right.
And so,
or it feels too large for the situation.
It feels too big for the situation or something like that. So, I mean, and again, we're works in progress, This is stuff that these are things that I work on.
I was about to say, like, it's a work in progress. I mean, this will be a complicated topic for a lot of people.
Absolutely.
And that's okay. Like, a lot of the times we have, fun discussions on our All Pro Dad podcast, but some of them are going to be difficult. This one is a hard one because people come at this from different angles. And I think for a long time, maybe my parents' generation, their parents' generation, it was more important to have false strength than true vulnerability. Ooh. Like to put on that veneer of like, I've got it all together. I am bulletproof. Try to hit me. I don't bruise. Like that bravado is, it maybe makes you feel good on the outside. It's presenting well, but you are just decaying on the inside emotionally. Are you really healthy if the inside of you is all battered and bruised, but the outside presents as steel? I don't think so.
Well, can you imagine a dad coming to a kid that's crying and instead of going, stop crying, like stop it, is to say, pull him to the side, take him out of the shame loop and say, hey, it's okay to cry, but let's talk about what's going on. Like what's behind the tears? Are you angry? Are you sad? Are you frustrated? I mean, because that's strength, right? Yeah. That's not stop it. I want to control you because I'm uncomfortable with this, or stop that emotion, but pulling them aside, giving them a little space and go, hey, what's going on, buddy?
I feel really pressed to share this. But I just, something came to my mind of, those teenagers, those teenage boys, that they don't have a dad. Sorry. I recognize I'm very blessed to have a dad, and I'm very blessed to be a dad, but there are people out there that don't have a dad. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. And those kids, they might hear this and they might say, I don't know if they'll ever hear the All Pro Dad podcast, but if they were to hear this, they would say, I don't have time to show my emotions. I mean, you've got kids that have gone from 14 to dad overnight because they have to be that male figure for their younger brother.
That was the case for my dad. Yeah.
The kids. And so if you're a dad listening to this and a family like that, whether it be, from church or anything like that, I don't know. It's challenging me to reach out to some of those kids and be a father figure.
Yeah. And all you have to say is, hey, how you doing?
How you doing?
I know I was in youth ministry for a long time, and all you had to say to a kid was, how you doing, buddy?
Yeah.
And they go, or I'll get in a conversation with somebody at work where I worked before, and she goes, I saw you talking to, fill in the blank. And I said, how did I start it? She said, you went, how you doing? But that's a great point.
It's important.
And here's dads come in a lot of different forms.
Yeah.
Right. That's good. Yeah. Stop being so sensitive.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking about this.
Buck.
Yeah. I was thinking about this earlier because we've had BJ Foster on the podcast before. Great writer, incredible dad. And he shared, we take clips from our podcast, we put them on Instagram. Shameless plug, follow us on Instagram. But we share little clips from the show, and designed to like give you a little snippet of what we're going to talk about, but also, get your mind going. And he had one particular episode where he talked about how his daughter had never seen him cry. She said this out loud one day at the dinner table, and he was caught off guard. He goes, well, that's weird because I cry all the time. But he realized that he actually would go like to his room when he was going to cry, and he'd never do it in front of his daughter. And I think he kind of came to the realization is because he didn't want to present as weak. And so we took that clip on its own. It's a good clip. In the context of the entire podcast, it really blended well. You got to listen to the whole thing. But in that little clip that we shared, 30 seconds on Facebook, somebody, and I was stunned, somebody commented, the only reason a man should cry is if his kid dies. Ugh. And I thought, man, how bold is, I don't know who the person was, and I'm not doing this to shame them necessarily, just got my brain going, like for a stranger who doesn't know BJ or anyone else for that matter, to make a comment like that, like you can only cry as a man if you have a death in the family, like there's gotta be another reason, right? Like it's
somebody
not okay.
Told him that.
Someone told that person that you can't be sensitive. If you show it, you're weak. If you show it, you're not a real man. And for someone like BJ, who's a strong guy, he cries all the time. He's a very emotional guy. But for someone like him to hear that, And then for it to germinate in his mind to say, I guess they're probably right. Like, I don't want to be perceived as weak. Right. I'm going to stuff this down. Even for a person who's naturally emotional like BJ, he still did it. He still shoved it down.
My fear was crying in front of my kids. They were going to think I'm out of control, which means they're not safe. Mm-hmm. That's why I would stuff that going, oh, don't let them think dad's hurting or dad's having a hard time, because we've had other tragedies they've had to watch me deal with. Yeah. And then I would try to duck away because I didn't want to.
Over the course of time, because you've had people come to you, and I feel so bad that people would say things like that to you when you were younger. You were just grieving on the phone with your mom's friend or whatever else. But over the course of time, when people would say these things to you, did you start to feel like your feelings were actually an enemy? That they were beating you down? Like they were in conflict with you over time?
I felt like, and I'm new journey, guys, new journey, that there was this lane of emotions that I could have that were okay. I could be angry, which is where all my sadness was, how they would come out. It would come out in anger, which I think a lot of guys can relate to. Mm-hmm. But there was this lane of, you can be sad. I mean, you can be angry and you can be happy, but even that emotional, you got to keep the happy tap down. You can't be quote unquote too much. And I watched how I would deal with my kids. They had this certain, like, you can be so excited, but hey, you need to calm down a little bit. Or even crying at times. I don't remember being mean to my kids about it, but I do think more of their anger. I could handle the other emotions better than anger. Mm. Like if they were sad, I didn't have this need to go, stop crying. Like I didn't feel that. But when they would they'd be angry and see me going, hey, you're really angry. What's going on? Yeah. Or so, hey, it's okay to be angry, but it's not okay to do that. But what's going on? So yes, I feel like I've been running from them. And when you run from something for a long time, you get tired.
Yeah.
And I think I just got to the point, and as a believer, I just felt like God caught me and said, you need to rest a little bit, buddy. Like these are not your enemy. And I think that's one of the things I'm just still coming to grips with it. It's okay to feel like this.
Yeah.
It's okay to be sad about something. Another one that I think is said so much is that emotions are for girls, or I don't think you're acting like a girl, which is such a slam and so demeaning to our daughters and our wives.
Yeah.
To say you're being like your mother, you're being like your sister. It's so twisted.
Making something negative that's not.
Makes it sound less than.
Yeah. And I have seen that fade out. Like when I look at this message, I have seen that fade out. But it is a thing where girls, what's unfair to them is they're stereotypically only allowed to be sad. If they're angry, if they get angry at work, then they get called a different name. If a guy gets angry at work, he's passionate. Yeah. So they're dealing with some other stereotypes. But I think, girls are not allowed to get angry, or they're being whatever, but they're allowed to be sad. And so the messages or emotions, and it's nobody's fault. I mean, we're all figuring this out.
Yeah.
We're all figuring this out. The other one is keep it to yourself. Like you just need to keep going, look at you talking about all your problems. Yeah. Like you need to keep that to yourself.
Caveat, I mean, there are times where it is appropriate and not appropriate, but when that's the norm, is to say, keep it to yourself.
Oh, totally.
That's where the problem lies in.
Yeah. It's appropriate transparency and vulnerability. Like you don't share with there's got to be safe people, but that's a good point.
Yeah. Yesterday we had a situation where I got home from work. My son was so excited. Dad's home. Want to play with dad. Awesome. I was like, well, we can, but I also told your sister we were going to play this card game. So I was playing the card game. Finished up the card game, and it was right at the time when he was most excited about playing. It was right when dinner was ready to eat. And so he's like, all right, it's my time. And my wife says, all right, it's time for dinner. And I said, oh, we're not going to play now. He lost it because he'd been looking forward to this so much all day. Mm-hmm. Sobbing, tears, ran to his room, unconsolable because he had been looking forward to this. I'm like, we can play after dinner. Like, let's go eat dinner. Wasn't having it. And so I went in there and I told him, like, okay, listen, I understand you're sad. I get it. You're allowed to be sad, but like, this isn't like the end of the night. It's just, we're going to take a pause, but it just didn't go his way. And I was sitting there and I knew we were going to talk about this today. And I was like, man, in the moment, I felt the need to tell him, it's okay for you to feel upset. And I want you to tell me when you're upset.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that everything's always going to go your way. Feel what you feel. It's okay. Yeah. We're going to have dinner and then we'll play. I think there's a balance there. You know, I don't want him to be, we talked about emotional roller coaster on other episodes. Like, I don't want him to be so high and so low that now he's kind of out of whack there. But I also want him to understand that, like, I'm not afraid of you feeling things, and you shouldn't be afraid to tell me you feel things. I want to hear it from you. Don't be afraid to come and tell me stuff.
And you watch with kids and even spouses, they will escalate until they feel heard and understood.
Yeah.
Like, I watch, that's when people fights start getting larger and people are escalating. You're not hearing me. And we're waving a flag. I'm hurting. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why so many marriages end, is because they don't know what they're dealing with and they don't want to talk. And there's just not the empathy to say to your kid, hey buddy, it's understandable that you want to play. It's understandable. I want you to talk to me about it. Right now it's dinner. And if you keep doing this, I think it's just those moments of just saying to them. We talked about this on another episode. I mean, just the gift of empathy to say, hey, I understand this. It doesn't change the consequence. It just gets them to a place where they can hear what you're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking a lot about like sadness and anger, but there's so many other emotions that I don't want my kids to be afraid of. Like, you know, you can be scared. Like, I've been scared in my life. It's okay. It's okay to be nervous. Yeah. It's okay to be confused. Like, there's so many different emotions. And when we kind of pigeonhole our kids into thinking that only some are acceptable, we're setting them up for failure, because then they're pushing down parts of them that God made that's natural. You know, and really, you know, you talk about being a believer. Like, I think that God gives us these emotions so that we can be drawn back to relying on him and not ourselves. Because in our own power, we're just going to be, you know, incapable of overcoming all these difficulties in our life. But I really feel like if we're able to express ourselves in the way that we've naturally been made to express ourselves, without guilt, without feeling bad about ourselves for feeling what's natural, you know, you're gonna have better relationships because you can be honest.
I want to do something. What's the first word that comes to mind after I say this? Pent up
anger.
Yeah.
Yep.
Or frustration.
But think about pent up anxiety. Like, anything that's pent up, when the second that it lets go, it's going to be a wreck.
And talking about pent up.
But all we do is like talk about pent up anger.
Yeah.
But there's so much more to that. You know?
I was just in the airport, and there's this little realm of book. There's probably 30 books on there max. And I think I counted like 10, like 8 to 10 of those books were about anxiety and worry. I think it's like we have finally released it, going, if the insides of you feel out of control, and I think people are finally, I'm saying I'm anxious. It's like a rebranding of going, everybody's got, there's so much relief to go, I just feel anxious about this. It doesn't make you weak. It's just like, all of a sudden, and underneath anger almost every time it's usually hurt. Like, what are you afraid of, man? Like, what are you afraid of? Like, with my daughter, like, she struggles with some anxiety, and there's these things that she can do physically for her body, right? You need to drink water, you need exercise, you need to sleep. And I watch myself getting angry with her about not doing these things for her anxiety, which it's always super effective. No, that would be sarcasm, which I have the gift of. But underneath that, like, Dad, what are you angry about? Well, I'm afraid. Well, what are you afraid of? Well, I'm afraid that if she doesn't do these things, that she's going to be anxious for a really long time. I'm really afraid that she's going to suffer with this underneath it. And when I can go, hey, I'm afraid, and say to her, I'm afraid, all of a sudden, and I've watched how she's responded to that. And even my wife, I am the master of controlling my emotions. I mean, I'm a Christ follower. I study about behavior management, and I've become good at it. That's why I think everyone's surprised of, oh, you don't know how to feel. No, I've just learned how to manage, quote unquote, right? But it's under there. So even those of us who feel like you're in control, the question is you still have emotions. No matter where you are on the spectrum, it's kids that research shows kids are coming to this world with their brains wired, some of them more to think and some of them more to feel, but make no mistake about it. All of us have emotions.
Yeah.
Our kids have emotions, and they need us, like every other topic, to help guide them through it. But we cannot guide them through it to a place that we have not been. And this is not an issue of weakness. This is an issue of strength and helping them build emotional muscles. So when their kid does something that scares them, instead of them getting angry, all of a sudden they have the appropriate response. And I want to say to everybody listening, we know this is lofty. We know this is, we're still doing a lot of research about this, but this is so key. And there's things that we can do. And most of it is just breathing and stopping and telling our kids, if you feel this way, it's understandable. Yeah. It's normal.
I want to ask you one thing, because the main question of our episode was, how do we build our sons' emotional muscles? That's not discounting that our daughters should also have emotional muscles, but specific to sons, when you look at this list, why is it so important that your sons grasp this and master this?
Because I've watched what happens to men when it doesn't happen, and they become very angry or passive aggressive. Some people's anger is really big and demonstrative, and everybody can label it. And then sometimes it is silent but deadly. You're watching that. And if we don't, as men, learn how to know what's beneath our anger, then our kids are going to live out the same way. And we don't want that for them. So I think if we can reframe and start looking at emotions, they're not weak. It's strength. It's another thing. Because I want my kids to think of me as like a steady, safe harbor. That's the guy I can go to. And when I go to him and say I'm feeling a certain way, instead of going stop it or don't or you shouldn't, is going, I want to feel strong, and I want to build and tell them that it is okay. And never are we more strong with our child's emotions when we tell them it's okay to have them. Yeah. Sorry, I get a little passionate about this because it's just something that I just think, it's so important.
Well, and even to the dad that doesn't have a son, but you have daughters.
Oh, absolutely.
You were a son, and this is important for you too, because as dads, when we're learning, even when we're going through this list, and it's challenging to me, of like, don't say this to my sons. I'm like, don't say it to myself either. You know,
right?
Don't say it to me, because I need to be able to show my sons. Or if I didn't have sons, if I just had two daughters, I need to show my daughters how a man should deal with their emotions in a healthy way. Because I want to be an example to my daughters of who a good husband is. And, and then that'll dictate kind of who they're looking for when they're growing up.
Absolutely,
you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And so don't discount this episode if you don't have a son, because really this is for all of us.
At the core of you.
This is for me to be a better dad. I have to don't tell myself don't cry. Don't tell myself emotions are for girls.
Nope.
So.
Absolutely. And I think that's a perfect transition to, the pro move of the week. Bobby, what's our pro move?
I think the most appropriate pro move of the week would be ask your child if you've ever said anything like what we talked about today that would keep him or her from wanting to express their emotions. If you ask them, it's like, have I ever said anything that made you uncomfortable to tell us how you really feel? Ask them. They may surprise you with what they say.
That's good. And you may find out some things you're doing right too.
Yeah.
You may find out
this
you're doing
a good
better
conversation. There's a lot more on the bone here, I think.
Absolutely. In fact, we're going to have a follow-up to this. Like, now that we've removed some of these obstacles, now we're talking about the things we don't want to say. We're going to talk more about the things we do want to say. And not only that, how do you deal with your feelings in a way that's going to feel healthy to them and safe to them and secure to them? Because again, most of us were not taught this, and we're all still learning this. So we'll have another episode.
Part two coming.
Part two coming.
Part two.
That's
more
right.
Buck, more Ted.
Ooh.
Oh, all right. Well, thank you for diving into an emotional
roller coaster of an episode.
Yeah, we did a whole Speaking of that, we have a whole podcast on that too.
Yeah. Right.
How to have your kid ride the emotional roller coaster. But anyway, we're so glad that you guys were listening today. It's just brave of you to do it. And just, it is not easy to hear this stuff or deal with this stuff. This feels like a lot. You're like, hey, I'm driving down the road or I'm just on a run and you're talking about all this heavy stuff. But it's important that you're doing this. Thanks for listening. We know that you and your kids will be glad you did. Thanks for listening to the All Pro Dad podcast. All Pro Dad is the fatherhood program of the nonprofit Family First. Along with our motherhood program, iMom, we exist to help you love your family well. Subscribe to our daily email, the All Pro Dad Play of the Day, by going to allprodad.com/subscribe and get daily powerful and practical fatherhood tips in your inbox. The All Pro Dad podcast is hosted by me, Ted Lowe, produced by Bobby Lewis.